Good evening, everyone. We're so grateful that you could join us here this evening. I know that, like me, you're probably very concerned about the images and the stories that you're seeing coming out of Israel today in the last couple of days. I've just seen the horrific news that the most recent victim of the rocket attacks in Israel is actually a 5-year-old girl in Sderot who's just died. And as a parent, it's absolutely terrifying to think about what's happening right now in Israel and the kind of pain, anxiety, and trauma that Israelis are dealing with. I woke up this morning, and I'm sure, like many of you, we saw friends and family members and things like that on social media who are in Israel and who are posting what's taking place there. And I woke up and I saw someone my age, a friend who I'd gone to university with, who was posting pictures of herself with a newborn, only a couple of weeks old, while trying to take her other 2 kids under 5 years old into a bomb shelter in the middle of the night while the sirens were blaring. And as a mom of 2 little kids, I couldn't even imagine what that must be like. And that's what's happening. That's the reality in Israel today. One of the things that's really unique about the work that we do, and I'm shifting gears here to get into our program tonight, the work that we do about UJA, is that it's so multifaceted and we connect with this issue in so many ways, whether it's through our Israel programming in Toronto or frankly through the deep partnerships that we have created with communities on the ground in Israel, like Sderot and Eilat and Bat Yam. We feel so connected to the Israelis who are living in those communities. And when they're suffering, we want to be there for them, and we truly want to understand what support that they need and what they're going through. One of the ways that we're able to help and that we're connected to Israel is through the advocacy work done in Canada by CIJA, our advocacy agent, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And really, by bringing together CIJA along with many of our other, I'll say, Israel initiatives, we're able to look at how we, through UJA Federation, can meet some of the big challenges facing Israel together. And frankly, in the last couple of days, all we've been thinking about is the fact that you don't really get bigger challenges than hundreds and thousands of rockets raining down on Tel Aviv in a single night. We're here tonight to get a better understanding of what's taking place in Israel right now, but we're not just here to share, we're also here to ask for your help. We want to ask you to join us in meeting the challenge together and to how we can all play a role in helping to support Israel when they really, really need us. Many of you know that UJA, through our annual campaign, supports CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, our advocacy agent. Our donors have invested for so many years in building a strong advocacy organization to represent our community. And as a result, when something like this happens, we're well positioned to meet these challenges when they arise head on. We have a strong voice for our community in Ottawa and across the country. We're very, very lucky to have Shimon Fogel at the head of CIJA as the CEO. Anyone who knows politics and who follows politics will know about a newspaper called the Hill Times, Canada's parliamentary newspaper. And every year that paper creates a list of the most influential lobbyists in Canada. These people are the real movers and shakers in terms of affecting Canadian public policy. And if you read that list, you'll see Shimon Fogel's name, who shows up consistently year after year. He's an incredible leader and mentor in the community who has spent a good portion of his life as the chief advocate for the Canadian Jewish community. I'm going to turn it over to Shimon momentarily, but I just wanted to speak for a quick moment about the format tonight. Shimon's going to provide us with an update and give us really an inside view as to what's taking place in Israel right now, what the challenges are, how we can help as Canadian Jews on the ground who want to be supportive of what's taking place, who want to be supportive of Israelis right now who are going through such a difficult time. But I also want to make sure that we have some time for questions from all of you. And so we're going to turn it over to Shimon in a moment. He will speak. Please, if you have questions throughout, you'll see a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in your questions as they come up. We're not going to be able to get to all of them because I'm sure there are going to be many. We have about 1,000 people on the line right now. But please put them in and we'll have time with Shimon for Q&A following his remarks. That's it. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Shimon has to say and how we can help as a community to support those who really need us in Israel at the moment.
Thanks, Sarah. Let me add my thanks to all of you for joining, and in particular to UJA Federation Toronto, as well as the federations across the country who have joined Toronto tonight, who have invested in CIJA and the platform it provides for the community to both advance and defend our community's interests. Everybody's gathered on this call because they care for the Jewish people, they care for the Jewish state. But why? For some, it's embedded in their religious beliefs. For others, it's more of a cultural thing. And for still others, it's almost muscle memory. My parents were committed to Israel, so I carry on. Perhaps with not as much feeling or knowledge or direct experience, but it has some value. But I think there's something much deeper going on. So before going into the briefing proper, let me share a brief story. It is, as we say, Maaseh Shehaya Be'emes. This is a true story. And it involves the family of the rabbi of the synagogue that I attend, a lovely young fellow who hails from Chicago. And during this year of COVID, his wife's family was challenged on how to gather together as they do every year on Hanukkah in order to celebrate together. So they decided that they were going to do a Zoom call. Now, my rabbi's wife has a brother who is currently in South America. I don't recall the particular country. I think it's Uruguay, and he's doing some work there. But he's doing it in a place that is quite remote and not easily accessible. So he, of course, was part of this family Zoom gathering on Hanukkah, and they were chatting away as they were waiting for everybody to join, when all of a sudden, the image of him on the screen went wild. It started shaking around. There was lots of noise, almost flashbang kind of thing. The computer looked as if it was being upended and fell to the floor. And there were a couple of strange people who appeared on the camera, shouting and screaming invective in Spanish. And then it went dark. And of course, everybody knows the reputation of some countries in South America and how rough they can be and how vulnerable individuals are to attack and kidnapping. And his family, viewing this in Chicago and in New York and in Ottawa, became instantly petrified that something terrible had happened, that he'd been attacked, and they didn't know what to do. So the rabbi reached out to me, thinking maybe our contacts with government officials could be imposed upon in order to try and find a way to rescue and help this fellow. And it's not the first time that people have come to us asking for some consular help for a family member or a friend who was stranded somewhere or to whom some unanticipated emergency occurred. And I said, well, I can go to the Canadians and ask them to use their consular tools in order to try and see what's going on. And then I realized, of course, he's American. So the Canadians are not going to access or leverage all of their contacts for somebody who's not a Canadian national. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, wait, I can go to the Israelis. And I reached out to somebody who's part of the diplomatic mission. And I gave him a quick update on what the situation was. And he said, get me this information, his identity, his passport, the location of where he's at, and I'll get right back to you. So I got the information from his family and I passed it on to him. He said, wait for my call. You don't have to do anything. 15 minutes later, he's back on the phone with me, telling me that the Israelis in that country, the diplomatic mission, had reached out to the government, then were connected to the national police, who dispatched somebody at the regional office. They were going to go and reach the individual, the fellow's residence and determine what had gone on. I'm just reaching out to the family to update them on what's happening when they call me first. And they say, he's okay. His computer was hacked. And there are national police who've just arrived at his door looking to help him. They were just overcome with gratitude for the intervention and for the help and support that was provided. And I'm listening to all of this and I'm saying to myself, oh my goodness, what a special, special experience this was. And it underscored for me the bond that connects Jews around the world with our countrymen in Israel, and why that's such a special connection that we have, and that gets such manifestations and examples of its dynamism, of how real it is, and how meaningful it is. There's a second part to the story, and I'll get to that later. But let me turn now to the purpose of this call. And it's not to provide a news update. There are plenty of easily accessible sites that'll tell you that Hamas has fired more than 1,200 missiles into Israel, that some 20% of those missiles have actually fallen within Gaza proper, resulting in the deaths of at least a dozen people, including 4 children, that the missiles have caused the deaths of 6 Israelis and the wounding of some 300 more, that Israeli Arabs have responded to the battle cry from Hamas, instigating lynching mobs in many parts of the country and rioting and attacking Jews in Jerusalem and pretty much any community that they can access. Let me just pause for a moment and state that attacking innocent Arab Israelis, which has occurred, is as unacceptable as any assault on Jewish Israelis. And we have to signal that reality in unequivocal ways. Any attack on an Arab in Bat Yam is as worthy of condemnation as any attempted lynching of a Jew driving in Jerusalem. All of that said, I want to focus on 3 things beyond the news. What the direct actors are currently thinking and planning. Second, why this is different than past crises that we've endured. And most importantly, number 3, what we should be doing to meet the challenge. What we have to understand first and foremost is that the crisis we're witnessing today is not organic. It didn't just emerge spontaneously. Hamas instigated this hot conflict, and it did so for a very specific reason. When Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, understood that parliamentary elections would mean the end of his reign and Fatah would suffer defeat to Hamas in the West Bank, he canceled the elections. Now, he may have used the contrived pretext of elections in Jerusalem as the excuse for canceling them, but even his former strategist, Diane Bhutto, called it out for what it was, a decision of a coward who didn't want to face his constituency and was unwilling to accept accountability. Both Bassam Eid and Khaled Abu Tomeh, 2 Palestinian commentators, have written excellent analyses of this, and you'd be able to find that on CIJA's website. Now, Hamas was enraged that its path to dominance in the West Bank was thwarted, so it adopted an approach that appealed directly to the street. Only we, said Hamas, can defend the honor and interests of the Palestinian people. And only we can defend the sanctity of Al-Aqsa. So it co-opted the Sheikh Jarrah issue and the already resolved matter of access to the Temple Mount, and its message resonated with the street. It tapped into the boiling resentment of the Palestinian Authority and the widespread anger at its corruption. And it underscored its leadership by launching both the call for rioting in Israel proper and the launching of missiles from Gaza. It did something else too, which we have to really lament. It breached and upended decades of efforts to reconcile Jews and Arabs in Israel. It sowed distrust and enmity between Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis almost overnight. And that was part of its goal. To be blunt, Hamas has achieved all of its strategic goals. And it'll be all downhill for Hamas from here on in, with rising casualty rates and damage to its military and organizational infrastructure. It can only lose from here on in. And that's why it's secretly signaling a desire to work towards an immediate ceasefire. And I suspect within the coming day or two, we'll hear reports of efforts to achieve a ceasefire. For Israel, on the other hand, the imperative is to restore its deterrence capability, and it needs time to do that. It's unclear that the international community in general, and the Biden administration in particular, will afford Israel that time, which would involve at least a week of an operation, in order to disrupt and degrade Hamas, its operations, and its capacity. What can be said is that the otherwise fractious Israeli political system has united at this moment. Benny Gantz standing shoulder to shoulder with Bibi Netanyahu, articulating a resolve that has given encouragement and hope amongst Israelis, even as they cower in their bomb shelters. The flip side, and we have to acknowledge it, is that this conflict may have caused irreparable damage to the effort by the change forces to build a new coalition and form a government. And that would mean a fifth round of elections in the fall. This will only add to the political paralysis that has plagued Israel. And that said, there are whispers about placing the needs of the country before the partisan needs of the central actors, and we can only hope that that'll be true. So those are the inside the Beltway broad strokes. Now let's turn to the question of why is this crisis different than all of them that we've experienced in the past? And I think there are three things that help explain it. First is what I would call a generational shift. Second, smartphones. And third is something that you might know as the woke society. Let me explain and unpackage it a little bit. The last time we had to deal with this kind of a crisis was in 2014. That's a generation ago. And that has real meaning. Today's social media activists have never witnessed this and are looking at it through an entirely different lens. They have no terms of reference through which to understand what they're seeing, the images that they're watching on their screens. And there are two specific considerations that have impacted on this. The first, as I mentioned, is smartphones, which we think have been around forever, but really were only introduced in 2012. It has provided an entirely new and not altogether constructive platform for interaction. Information is shared easily, it's shared superficially, and in many cases, anonymously. And that insulates people from any kind of accountability for what they say, what they share. And the second thing is a new and in some respects, disturbing backdrop against which all is measured. The new orthodoxy is the woke society. And it's a backdrop that is painted by something called critical race theory, the sometimes toxic, unintended collateral impact of the BLM movement and other social justice imperatives. It's the prism through which everything is viewed and assimilated. And it's superimposed itself on the public discourse, dictating what to think, dictating how to think. And that's changed everything. Now, let me be clear. We must embrace the challenges the Black Lives Matter movement has brought into sharp relief. We should toil tirelessly to confront and eliminate injustice, including systemic racism. But one of the outcomes that has been less than positive indeed even destructive, is this woke mentality. If you're part of the oppressor society, and Israel absolutely is in this view, nothing you do, nothing you stand for is just. And if you're part of the victimized cohort, everything you do is justified. So that's the context in which we have to move our advocacy forward, because it's having a dramatic impact on our target groups. And the bullying tactics of this new orthodoxy intimidate, chill, and disincentivize people from expressing support for Israel. What's missing from the conversation is the most basic of things, critical thinking. And we have to go back to basics to insist that critical thinking be applied. So our next step has to be engagement. I'm speaking to a committed group, and we need you to engage directly and forcefully with our political interlocutors and with media, with your own social networks. We have so quickly become used to impersonal communication, we forget the power of a conversation. We need all of you to make some phone calls and to reach out. The CIJA Action Alert, which Sarah is going to post on the screen momentarily, provides you with a platform to engage the political sector. Politicians have to hear directly from us over and over again, because they are absolutely hearing from the other side. We have prepared message tracks that reflect the consensus views within the organized Jewish community and can provide you with the necessary toolkit to make those calls, to write those letters, to post those Facebook posts, to get onto Twitter, to send emails. Go to our website and click on Israel Under Fire to access more information. And when you do, you'll find that the messages are pointed and focus on what is needed to correct the record, what the government has to do to correct the moral equivalence that's been injected into the equation, the confusion between the arsonist and the firefighter, that Israel and Israelis are committed to peace, have struggled to advance peace, and have, to the great misfortune of Israelis and Palestinians alike, been repeatedly rejected and rebuffed. We need everyone to step up and help us move the needle. Please connect and demonstrate your willingness to count and to be counted. Let me conclude with the other half of the story that I began with, because I think it closes the circle. So for my rabbi's family, the interventions of the Israelis were heroic and the cause for great celebration and reaffirmation of their love for Israel. Fast forward a few months. The individual who had intervened was confronted with a particularly acute medical emergency. Now, being Israelis posted abroad, they're covered by Israeli insurance. And typically what happens is that they pay for whatever medical attention or services they need, and they're reimbursed by their insurer back in Israel. In order to properly diagnose and treat the particular problem that came up, and I don't really pretend to understand what it was, they needed a very specialized nuclear imaging device. And when their doctor here approached the hospital, they were advised that it could not be done. They could not pay for it. They could only be accessed through what we here in Ontario call the OHIP card, their Medicare card. And they didn't know what to do. So he turned to me and he said, is there any way that you can help? Because as it is, we can't get back to Israel. It's not possible to do. It was still during the height of COVID and closures. No planes were flying. And in order to get the imaging through the hospital, it would have been delayed for some 6 weeks. So I made a call. Somebody who actually, a physician who had come from Toronto, was at Sunnybrook, I believe, and had just recently taken up a post as the chief of nuclear imaging and radiology here at the Ottawa Hospital. A committed Jew, a great supporter of Israel. He was driving at the time. I spoke to him on the phone. It took me about 90 seconds before he said, just have them call me with the referral. I will take care of everything. Within 36 hours, the imaging was done, the diagnosis was made, the interventions were taken care of, and the eternal gratitude of this Israeli and his family for the assistance that was provided by somebody from the local Jewish community was beyond expression. And when I heard this story, it all came full circle for me. Our commitment to Israel is mirrored in Israel's commitment to us. And that's the essence of the UJA mission. CIJA is part of it, and we're privileged to carry out the public affairs and advocacy effort on behalf of UJA and the organized Jewish community. But UJA's commitment to Israel and to the community here goes much further. So I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity as I conclude my remarks, Sarah, to thank you and the Federation leadership in Toronto and across the country for the confidence and faith that you've placed in us and for all that you do to keep our community whole, growing, vital, and engaged. Thanks very much.
Shimon, sorry, I think you ended up on mute. If you can click on mute. Thank you. Sorry. Small technical difficulty. Thank you so much, Shimon. I really appreciate that. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in, and I just want to take a moment to address some of them right off the bat, and then turn over back to Shimon with some of the questions that are coming up. So the first is you'll see in the chat, or in the chat, I've posted a link to the CIJA action alert. This is the best way we have right now for community to mobilize to urge the government of Canada to condemn Hamas terror. So please click on the link. Feel free to share that link with friends and family. You can copy and paste it into an email and circulate it. The more letters, the better, because we need government to understand right now that we have a strong base of support in the communities and across Canada. So please, please don't hesitate to reach that link. That's the first thing. The second thing is I've seen a number of questions come up in the Q&A about how we as a community can mobilize and what we can do to come together. And I want to take this opportunity to announce that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, UJA Federation in Toronto will be hosting a virtual rally for the community to come together called Toronto for Israel. And really in this, we will be calling on as many community members as possible to join, to come together, to think about what's going on in Israel, to lend our support. An email announcement is going to be going out later this evening and then throughout the day tomorrow, but please make a note that it will be taking place tomorrow at 7 p.m. We're going to have a number of special guests from Israel speaking, including Daniel Gordis, Michael Bauer, among others, and local leaders as well. So please make a note that that's something that we can do tomorrow to come together. And please make a note as well about the action alert. Shimon, I want to take you back for a moment to your comments on social media and smartphones and things like that. Of the 22 questions that we've already seen, now about 25, sorry, about more than half of them have been on social media, ranging from TikTok to Facebook to Instagram. We have some questions from young community members as well who are saying there is a complete onslaught of anti-Israel activity, and even in some cases, very personal comments from friends, coworkers, things like that, misinformation on social media. And people are asking, are there resources that they can rely on or sources of information that they can draw on? And really, as an individual activist, like what is the best strategy to combat this kind of misinformation on social media?
So, Sarah, thanks for that. We recognize the potency of social media, and we have begun to stockpile and place on, or to post on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram resources and links that people can use that speak to the distorted narrative that's going forward. And we will continue to build up that inventory and have a bank of resources that are available. We will also post them to our website, to the special section on dealing with this particular issue. Nothing is going to replace the personal messaging, but we also have to call out the bullying that takes place. And I have to share the frustration that I think many are feeling about the intimidation that is being expressed on social media. You know, I heard a comment from one of my colleagues that her daughter was observing that there are loyalty tests that are now taking place where people are saying, if you express support for Israel, then defriend me, because you can't have both. You can't be part of what I believe in and still be a supporter and connected to Israel. This is not going to change overnight. But I think that we've been working also with the social media companies in order to address some of the toxic stuff that is meant to intimidate and bully. But the fact that we can't change it overnight doesn't exempt us from the need and the imperative to engage with it right now.
No, thank you, Shimon. And I see a couple more questions that have just come in specifically about TikTok. And I just wanted to draw, when Shimon mentions that they've been engaging, one of the most recent CIJA campaigns with support with the federations has been to deal with some of the anti-Semitism on TikTok. And so, Shimon, I don't know if you have any other, or if we're just, if we're still supposed to be raising these concerns as they come up.
You know, by all means do. I take note of it. We have had a major initiative on the issue of online hate. We have built a coalition. We just completed a very powerful and successful online conference on online hate. Some will have attended or participated. It included people like Martin Luther King III and his wife, whose name escapes me for the moment, but that has gained a lot of momentum and has garnered the attention of Parliament. The government imminently is supposed to be coming out with legislation that's going to address the issue of online hate, anti-Semitism, and racism, and what we must demand of the social media companies that serve as platforms for this.
Okay, thank you. We've had a few questions just about the CIJA issue and what CIJA's perspective is on it, what can be done. You know, how does the current crisis sort of relate to the current Arab-Israeli situation as well, and their relationship with Israel and the internal dynamics within the country. So if you could just shed some light on that for everybody.
You know, again, we'll have posted to our sites some really outstanding pieces of analysis that really break it down well. But in a word, I don't want to be dismissive of anybody confronted with an eviction notice or the uncertainty that attaches to that kind of thing. But at its core, this is an issue of or a dispute about title and deeds to 4 houses. It's not some mass deportation. It's not the eviction of a town. It's not a settlement enterprise. We're talking about a neighborhood that we refer to as Shimon HaTzadik, that they refer to as CIJA, that is all about occupancy. I won't get into the technical details, but it's a case that's been going on in the courts for 15 years. And I think if Israel has established anything, it's the credibility of the independent judiciary and confidence that all parties can have in the objectivity of the court in ruling on these kind of things. Let me just parenthetically say, we have to recognize discrimination that Arab Israelis have faced in many, many different ways over the years. And it's something that Israel really has to confront in a meaningful way. And one could even argue that this is a manifestation of it, but it's before the courts. To distort it and leverage it as the cause célèbre for the launching of 1,200 missiles aimed at killing people, you can't equate, even without being dismissive, of 4 houses and 1,200 missiles. So there's no doubt that CIJA was exploited by Hamas in order to become a flashpoint for advancing its agenda, and it has to be understood in that way. The irony is, Sarah, that what the court was petitioned to do was to affirm the rights of the tenants. And that's the kind of compromise I understand the court was looking to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Shimon, can you tell us a little bit more about the Canadian political response and what you've been hearing in Ottawa? I know you spoke a little bit about it, but anything more you can say as to how things are being perceived by our political influencers?
Okay, so just to put a disclaimer, like UJA, CIJA is nonpartisan. We don't affiliate with any party. We don't favor any party. In fact, we're prohibited from doing that by law. So whatever comments I offer are simply a description and placing some context or meaning on it. We've been somewhat frustrated with the government's response. The most recent statement is one that was issued by Foreign Minister Mark Garneau, with whom I'll be having a conversation with tomorrow morning. Mark Garneau historically has been a strong friend of the Jewish community. He's an MP from Montreal, from Westmount. He has real relationships with Jews in the community and has been to Israel several times. So he gets what's going on. But I think that the Liberals have been struggling to try and satisfy multiple interest groups. And by trying to be everything to everyone, they've really not satisfied anyone. We were looking for some specific messages from the government. We wanted a recognition that Hamas is launching missiles indiscriminately into Israel, that it is responsible for the conflict. We got fairly advanced in achieving that kind of recognition. Not all the way, but certainly significantly. Where we're concerned is a tone of some moral equivalence that recognizes the destructive actions of Hamas while raising almost equal concern in the language that they used for violence on the Temple Mount, the CIJA incident, and settlement activity. The reality is that one can stake out any view they want on settlements, but settlements really has nothing to do and has triggered nothing of the current crisis. And the chronology of activity and conflict on the Temple Mount at Al-Aqsa is exactly opposite what has entrenched itself in the narrative. So it's not about Israeli authorities or the Israeli police evicting and that's the language that's being used, evicting worshipers from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and exacerbated by it happening during the month of Ramadan. It's the Israeli police going in to apprehend rioters who are stockpiling and launching and lobbing boulders the size of bowling balls and cinder blocks down over the Temple Mount onto the Western Wall Plaza. So there's been a reversal of causality here that really has to be corrected. And we were looking to the government to reflect some understanding of what the real chronology was and who the perpetrators are, and the efforts that the Israeli authorities have taken in order to de-escalate and to bring a level of calm.
Okay, thank you. Also, while you're speaking, I'm getting a number of questions, just if you have any comments on the US political response to this to date and how it's different.
I think our, it's not for us to comment too much on what happens in another country, but in consultation with our colleagues in our sister organizations in the US, they're expressing more than a little concern. They find the support for Israel very tepid. They find the emphasis on responsibility attached to Israel for reducing the conflict, for de-escalating, disproportionate and not reflective of the reality on the ground. That's not to say that they aren't expressing support, as did the Canadian government, for Israel's right to defend itself, but it is not being expressed with the kind of wholehearted sentiment that one would expect from any American administration.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to all the questions, just a couple more we have time for, if that's okay. Shimon, we have a couple of questions about the impact that all of this is going to have on the Abraham Accords and, relationships that have been developing between Israel and, frankly, some people who traditionally have not been allies or partners.
That's a really important consideration, and thank you for bringing it forward. This is clearly the first very big test of the newly established ties between Israel and some of the Arab states, both those that have been formalized and those that are in the process now. So far, they've weathered the storm. There have been expressions of deep concern. I'm sorry for that. There have been expressions of deep concern on the part of the Gulf states and other partners that Israel has. But I think that the understanding and the communication that has gone back and forth is not that it's pro forma, but that it is not putting the relationship itself at risk. And so I think that for the moment they are stable, and it's possible that they will provide. Again, I don't want to be trite or dismissive, but it might provide some of the callousing to the relationship that is necessary, because all relationships bilaterally and multilaterally go through easier times, better times, and tougher times. So I think that it might achieve some resilience. I will say, though, and let me just point out Egypt, because Egypt is an important player here. It has its own vested interest in being able to manage and rein in Hamas, which is directly related to the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded in Egypt and represents a real threat to the government there. So it has been an intervener in trying to rein in Hamas, even as it has criticized Israel for its actions. Where I personally have a particular concern is with Jordan, because I think Jordan, while understandably especially concerned because of the majority Palestinian population that it has within its kingdom, their rhetoric has been especially harsh. I don't know if it's pro forma. I don't know if it's because they are still formally the custodians of the Temple Mount of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it's something that we're going to have to watch very closely.
Okay. I'm going to do two more questions before we close, if that's okay. Shimon, we've had a number of questions come in after we discussed social media about the mainstream media, and in particular, what we can do as community members to help either, help raise concerns with mainstream media and really advocate for, whether it's Canadian media or international media, to present, I'll say, more of an unbiased view, or to at least acknowledge some of the facts that are real on the ground. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so three things that I'll say. First, we face a technical challenge. Most news organizations have actually closed down their Jerusalem offices. So, not that they were always so great, but at least they had somebody on the ground. And so what is happening is they are relying on the most part on the news wire services, things like Reuters and AP. And sometimes they're adjusting it a little bit for a Canadian context. Or they're using journalists on their staff who are actually at a distance. It's always useful when you're listening to a news report, whether it's about Israel or anything else, to hear where the person's reporting from, right? If they're reporting about a Middle East story from London, you know that they're just getting their information from CNN. So that's going to impact on what they include in their story. That having been said, we have invested a lot of effort in developing a stable of expat Canadians resident in Israel who can be used for interviews, for messaging, for background information, for access to what's happening on the street. And what our experience is that news organizations, if they're going to go to somebody real, they would much rather go to somebody on the street than a talking head or some supposed expert from some foundation or think tank. So we have been very aggressive over the past 48 hours, trying to be like chase producers, to reach out to news and media organizations here in Canada to promote stories that involve people who can give live testimony, real testimony, Jane and John Doe, average person stories from the ground in Israel. So that's the second thing I'll say. The third thing that I'll say is that we've also engaged the media directly. I don't mean to be dropping names, but just by way of one example, I had well over an hour conversation today with David Walmsley, the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, with whom I have a relationship that goes back over many, many years. And we have similar relationships with many journalists and many editors and many producers. So we try to comment and help frame their stories. We call them out when we feel that we have to call them out. We try and provide resources for them, whether it's an op-ed or it's some insight or it's some information. We try to be shadchans, to connect them with people that can fill out their stories, especially with a Canadian perspective. And so all of that is ongoing. The final thing, though, Sarah, that I'll say is that everybody on this call and everybody within the pro-Israel community has a role to play. Now, I know people can't sit glued in front of their screens and monitor every single talk show, every single news report, every single CBC broadcast. But if you condition yourselves to actually respond to them, it counts. Even if your letter doesn't make it into the letters to the editor of the National Post or the Toronto Star or the Halifax Chronicle Herald, the fact that you wrote it counts. Every call that you make into a news organization to either compliment or to criticize the treatment of Israel in a story counts. So if we want to do something real and meaningful that's going to make a difference, that's going to move that dial, it will be to reach out and make that personal call or email.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I've heard from so many colleagues of mine, former colleagues, who work either in Ottawa or with a federal member of parliament, or even on the provincial level across the country. And they say the same thing. When they receive a letter, they assume that on average it represents a chunk of their constituency or a number of people. One letter doesn't represent one view. So for every letter that you send in, that everyone on this call sends in tonight, if the Prime Minister's office, or if a member of parliament or a member of provincial parliament is receiving 10 letters, that they can assume that represents the views of 100 people or more. So really every letter counts and every phone call counts. And I really can't emphasize that enough. Shimon, the last question for tonight, and again, it's come up, it's interesting. We have key themes that are coming up from everybody. I'll give this to you in two parts. One is, how can we, as the Canadian Jewish community, and specifically CIJA, the advocacy arm of the federations, work with other similar organizations around the world, right? So other Jewish communities around the world, to make our voice stronger and to lend more support. So that's number one. And number two, and somewhat related, is how can we partner with other organizations, advocacy organizations within our own community? And is that something that UJA and CIJA want to do? And I can tell you the spoiler as it is, but over to Shimon.
So thanks for that. We are part of a number of different global coalitions. First through the World Jewish Congress, where we serve as the Canadian affiliate, through the Commonwealth Conference, through a couple of Israeli-based global coalitions for Israel, through JFNA and their Israel Action Network, which is something sponsored by UJA in Toronto and the other federations across the country. We are in ongoing, constant, I would say not just daily, but hourly contact with them, sharing our perspective, our experience, learning what works for others, best practices, trends that come up. There really is a very, very tight relationship. And I'm proud to say that Canada contributes well above its weight to that global effort. Here in Canada, we have taken the principled decision that what our community needs most and what it wants to see most is collaboration and partnership and cooperation between different organizations. And we have, I think that everybody on this call will have taken note, over the last, I'd say 18 months or so, and certainly within the last year, have collaborated much more closely with B'nai B'rith Canada, with Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, through Must Speak, which is a coalition that we founded together with UJA to bring together all the organizations who are committed to combat anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. We have a whole inventory of like-minded organizations with whom we try and partner. As we speak now, our respective colleagues at B'nai B'rith and at Wiesenthal are working with our own staff on some messaging and some products that would go out under our united banner. And we think what that does is signals the sense and the quality of unity within the Jewish community. We don't share all of the perspective of other organizations or the approach that they do. We have our own unique model for how we do advocacy in public affairs and lobbying. But there is without a doubt at the core a shared commitment to the Jewish community, to the Jewish people, and to the Jewish state. And to that extent, I think the efforts of all of us are focused on trying to find every opportunity to join together. And this crisis is serving as a platform for us to do that again.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Shimon. That is, it's an incredible amount of information in just an hour. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this call. I know I speak for both UJA Federation and CIJA when I say it's our absolute priority to keep you, our community, updated as we go through this crisis, and to make sure that the information is flowing to you. We've heard some really concrete things that we can do as a community to step up and help tonight, starting with that action alert that we posted in the chat. I'm also looking at the community rally that we're going to host tomorrow night, which information will go out about later tonight with a link. So please sign up and please pass that on to others as well. I know CIJA will continue to pass along information for the various ways that we can help. And we'll make sure to spread that out as widely as possible. And again, please don't hesitate to write to us, to write to Shimon, to write to me, Sarah Lefton at UJA, to write to any of us with your questions, concerns, suggestions, or if you hear something and honestly just don't know how to approach it, we are here to help. And thank you again for taking the time to join us tonight. Have a good evening, and thanks, Shimon.